Asymmetrical Haircuts Justice Update with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
Happy New Year, Steph.
Happy New Year, Janet.
So, 2025, what are you looking forward to?
I'm really interested to see where things will go with Syria. There's so much up in the air. What is going to happen? Are we going to get more cases in The Hague? Is there going to be accountability? What is everybody going to do to scramble to document? But also, there's a couple of things coming up in domestic courts. This universal jurisdiction cases keep popping up, so I'm curious to see how that pans out. And of course, we have a lot of podcasts to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm with you when I think that issues of universal jurisdiction are going to be really, really important. I'm looking forward, if we can, to try and getting out of The Hague as much as we can. I mean, maybe not physically, but in terms of talking to people and getting hold of as many activists on the ground as we can, and talking to lawyers and talking to people who are trying to make things happen in their own jurisdictions. So I don't know what our plans are going to be because we make them up all the time. But let's see what we can get round to.
But if there are any lawyers out there who are lobbying for universal jurisdiction cases and want to come on the podcast and talk to us about it, please send us a message. Let us know what you're doing, what the cases are. And if you're willing to talk to us, we're interested in knowing what you're going to do and where it's going to happen, and maybe to do some things that are not necessarily on our very The Hague radar.
But, well, we were in The Hague, which was last December, which already feels like the month ago that it is. There was the big annual meeting of the International Criminal Court, the Assembly of States Parties. And on the last day, which is a little bit quieter because it's basically the day on which the budget is being decided in the end, and that's just the news that we're waiting for, I just saw who I could bump into around and ask them for some of their thoughts for the year ahead.
I hope that you didn't only ask them for their legal analysis and their very serious professional thoughts, but also about the books and the series and the podcasts they listen to, because that's part of my favorite bit of our show.
Yes.
Where we get nice recommendations.
Yes, I did. I will come to that in a moment, but let's kick off first with the thoughts and the worries of the year ahead. You'll hear from a number, and we'll just run through them. Some people wanted to share their surnames, some people didn't, so we'll just give the names as we have them. So we have Akila Radhakrishnan, who's an independent human rights lawyer and gender justice activist.
We have Michael, who's the head of the Chinese Initiative on International Law.
Sarah Kahika Kasande from Uganda, where she's the head of the International Centre for Transitional Justice Office.
We have friend of the pod, Owiso Wiso, a Kenyan lawyer and a farmer.
We also have Katja from the NGO Redress.
We have Ilya Nuzov, acting head of the FIDH International Justice Desk.
And Reid Brody of the International Commission of Jurists. But just a word of warning, though, the environment at the ASP, if you were there, you'd know at the World Forum, is not brilliant for recording. There's a lot of beeping and people chatting around. So there is a fair amount of background noise.
I hope the ICC survives. Actually, that's the only thing I hope for. Because it doesn't look good. If you look around, it doesn't appear as if we acknowledge the urgency of the situation. It doesn't look good going forward, especially with the Palestine arrest warrants and the announcement that Afghanistan may be coming. And more Sudan. So I hope the ICC survives.
I am now really worried of the prospect of armed conflict in Taiwan. With what happened with Trump getting elected, and you see the situation in the world getting really volatile. Like most recently with the Korean martial law drama fiasco, I feel like that region is getting more and more unstable. Anything could happen with this current Chinese authority. I don't know how to calculate this. And one thing leads to another before we even notice, before we realize it. That's something I'm really afraid of.
Well, I think the prospects for 2025 are quite bleak, to be honest with you. We have raging armed conflicts that have left civilian populations in a catastrophic situation, which continues to deteriorate in places like Sudan, Palestine, Ukraine, With respect to the latter, as we speak, the Ukrainians are bracing themselves for a really harsh winter in light of all the attacks against critical infrastructure that have been launched by Russia that have resulted in near destruction of the atomic stations, energy supplying stations that will leave them without electricity and hot water for the winter months. Besides that, you even have many places around the world which are not embroiled in armed conflict, but which have internal repressions that arguably reach the level of crimes against humanity. And I'm referring to places like Venezuela, like Belarus. I'm looking at the situation in Georgia with great alarm. In addition to all of this, we have one of the few institutions in the world that actually offers hope to victims of these violations, namely the International Criminal Court, that is facing unprecedented threats, existential threats, I would say, in the form of sanctions that are probably going to come this year from the United States, and then the threat of non-cooperation from states parties with respect to the arrest warrants that have been issued.
For 2025, I think it's important for us to know and to understand that there are things that we may not necessarily control. And I think for me and for us as this community, it's important to still find the strength to act courageously, creatively, and in accordance with our beliefs to have an impact, despite the realization that there are a lot of things that we do not control or do not have the power to impact.
Feels very unknown as we're walking into 2025. I think, coming from the United States, it's hard to not be thinking about what a change in governmental, the president is going to mean for many of the areas that all of us work in a world where crises continues to escalate. I think a lot of fear about how we might see further paralysis in the multilateral system, in our abilities to deliver justice, what it could mean for institutions like the International Criminal Court. So I think a lot of apprehensions, perhaps, going into 2025, but I also think it's not without, the hope of what is to come. I think one thing I'm very excited about is that we finally have a process to go forward on a Crimes Against Humanity treaty, and that we can work on something positive to think about how we can develop the infrastructure of international law, develop the institutions of international justice in a way that perhaps is more inclusive than they have been in the past. And so really thinking about how we channel some of this anxiety perhaps towards conversations that can be productive and positive and future-looking, not constrained by fear, but actually maybe driven by hope.
My hope, my fear is that the International Justice Project may die in the rubble of Gaza. My fear is that when, for the first time, an international court issues a warrant for a U.S. ally and shows that it can be even-handed, that could be the death of, international justice. And it can be unless the forces of good stand up and defend the court, defend international justice.
I am a bit worried because of the numerous crises going on and the limited international intervention towards addressing those crises. I mean, we have Sudan going on, we have Gaza, all other contexts. And for the court, we see that its resources are strained, but also it's facing increased attacks. And that may hamper its ability to execute its mandate. And that eventually, of course, limits access to justice for victims of these atrocities. So that has me worried. One thing that inspires me is the commitment, the passion of civil society and stakeholders in this justice ecosystem, regardless of the challenges, calling the court to operate at a higher standard, to live up to the promise of no one is above the law. And all this is only possible when we have vigilant stakeholders, civil society, state parties, reiterating their commitment. So that gives me hope into 2025 that regardless of the challenges, with our collective effort and this continued resilient approach, there will be some amount of.
I hope the ICC survives. Actually, that's...
We have vigilant stakeholders, civil society, state parties, reiterating their commitment. So that gives me hope into 2025 that regardless of the challenges, with our collective effort and this continued resilient approach, there will be some amount of.
So, Steph, I mean, obviously that's not necessarily a scientific poll on any level, but I think it is a bit reflective of some of the issues that people are worried about. What did you think?
Yeah, I think I noticed at the Assembly of State Parties that there was a lot of worry about the future of the ICC. And I do understand the cloud of sanctions and what is now going to happen. But I've also spent a lot of time at ICC ASPs where it was always kind of dark about the future. And I can see that it's hard to see what will happen, and that makes everybody usually a little more pessimistic. But I've also seen so much resilience in this kind of community of justice and accountability where things generally do take 20, 30 years for, in some cases, to come to some kind of resolution. And there are people who are dedicated to getting things done and doing them. And so I do feel that that last hope and those comments are something to hold on to. You have to keep looking for the things that you can believe in and build on and work for, because, yeah, if you lose hope, that's it. So I think we should all kind of look inside ourselves and see what the things that you can do and do those.
Deep thoughts for the new year. I don't know if I have exactly the same level. I was thinking, bloody hell, in 30 years I'll be dead. So no, let's. I don't think I can. I can wait that long.
I think that you should have more champagne. I mean, yes, but that's always been the case, right? If I start thinking about everything that's going badly, I'll just kind of put rocks in my pocket and walk into the sea. That's not a very constructive way. And even if we're doing a small thing, even if somebody, I don't know, if we have one person who listens to this podcast and thinks, oh, this is really interesting, this is what I want to do, or here is somebody who cares about what I'm doing, then that's in a way worth it for me. And then we're doing something that helps, right? So I don't want to hold this podcast up as a kind of thing that really helps people. But on the other hand, you have to look at those kind of things.
It's true. You have to do something. And part of the something is also to share a bit around some book, film, podcast recommendations. In fact, most people, I think, were looking kind of forward rather than back. So they were thinking about what they're thinking about watching. But I'm going to do my sort of backwards looking one. And this was my very enjoyable end of year watching, which was Black Doves on Netflix with Keira Knightley and Ben Whishaw. It's very London. It's the gang crime scene. It's top politicians and it's spies. So for me, it was kind of great to keep on spotting all the locations and really evocative of when I used to live there in the 80s and the 90s. I have known people who've worked high up at Number 10 and at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in some of these high echelons. And I do know some of the dodgier bits of London. One of my boyfriends used to live in one of those areas. I even lived in a dodgy bit myself, no longer dodgy, highly gentrified. And in fact, all of those areas are really just around every corner in London. And I just really enjoyed the Christmasness. I mean, they went full on with the carols and things. So that was my recommendation.
I also just started watching it. I'm only 2 episodes in, but I do enjoy the spy bit. And when I look at you, I see a weapon kind of things, and clandestine meetings with spy handlers. But also in my Netflix queue is I'm looking at Narcos, which is kind of fictionalized of the drug war against the Colombians, which is very American DEA kind of action movie things. On the other hand, it is with Pedro Pascal, which Pedro Pascal speaking Spanish is just something I can watch for hours, even if he's doing narco stuff. So I do recommend it. I really enjoy that much of this is in Spanish, and I did do a lot of Spanish in university and then kind of forgot about it and got replaced by my Serbian. But I'm now watching this series and hearing so much Spanish that I'm kind of it's all coming back to me. So I enjoy that. And in that same vein, and also kind of going back to the mid-90s when I was in university, is that HBO Max now has a series, Como Agua para Chocolate, based on the Laura Esquivel novel, which was a big deal in the 90s and which I read then and really liked. And it's set in revolutionary Mexico. And so it's a lot more Spanish in Mexico and 1990s vibes for me. So I enjoyed that.
Well, here we are then with the same group of people: Reed, Michael, Akila, Owiso, Katja, Ilya and Sarah, either with what they enjoyed in 2024 or what they plan to enjoy in 2025.
Well, I'm looking forward to Philippe Sand's book on Pinochet. In many ways, all of, 1998 was that year when we had both the International Criminal Court created in July and the arrest of Augusto Pinochet in October. I feel like I'm a child of Pinochet, and all the work that I've done, flows from when October 16th, 1998, when Augusto Pinochet was arrested, and then later when the House of Lords said that even though he was a former head of state, he could be arrested and prosecuted anywhere. That was a champagne moment for the human rights movement. It showed that we had the possibility to bring to justice people who seemed out of the reach of justice. And a lot of the work that people like me have flowed from that. And hopefully that work is going to continue.
I'm definitely following your podcast. Books I read, we have a new Chinese bookstore here, independent one here in The Hague, in Nowhere Bookstore. So there's lots of Chinese books there. But I want to recommend some English books to your audience. There's actually one, it's called Spark. It's about those young people who will be sent to the re-education or rural farming in the Cultural Revolution times, but they didn't give up their independent thoughts. So they actually created a magazine, a journal, in the Cultural Revolution, in the middle of all the purges and all those international crimes happening in the 1960s inside China, and they get punished for that. And this book, Spark, is about their story. And I found it very encouraging. It's both in Chinese and English, so people can... The author is called Ian Johnson. He was a journalist for New York Times for many years. And I'm really happy that he worked on this piece and discovered a history that even Chinese don't know about. It's a very encouraging story.
Well, I'm traveling this year quite a bit nomadic, so I've found that I'm not really watching so much, but I am reading a whole lot more. I think I'm going to go the path of my mom and get into fiction that surrounds a lot of female detectives and really just kind of maybe take my reading in a different direction than the work that I do.
I'm reading this book. It's called The Parisian by Isabella Hamad. And it's quite fascinating because it's sort of a fictional but historical book on Palestine. Yes, so that is quite fascinating and quite appropriate for the moment.
There is a book I've read this year. It's a book written by a Russian journalist, Elena Kostyuchenko, and it's called My Beloved Country. And it tells a story through a number of different materials that she's written and published about how Russia slipped into war and how that happened and what led to it at a very, very everyday level. So I really recommend this book.
Well, I plan to deepen my knowledge of the Russo-Ukrainian War by reading the new book by Serhiy Plokhy called The Russo-Ukrainian War, among other things. So that's on my immediate to-read list. And then I plan to also consider the aspects of collective responsibility of Russians for the war in Ukraine. And I want to dig into Karl Jaspers on German guilt to explore this question. So that's something I'm going to focus on.
Oh, as you know, I watch Formula One, so that is what I'd recommend for anyone to watch. Because, I mean, the work that we do in this space can be quite difficult and really stress-inducing sometimes. So watch Formula One. That's a good way to distract your mind.
So a really great start to our podcast year. And thank you to all of them and to everyone who agrees to be on the podcast.
And thanks also to all our great supporters on Patreon. Here is a shout out to a few of our new supporters.
Andri Bessidin.
Mirte Suring.
And Mirte, I should say, is one of those who's joined at the free level. You can always just join there just to see what we're up to and to get our newsletter. Also at the free level, Arba Ahmeti.
And we have Lubomir, which is a Slavic name that means love of peace, which is a good Christmassy New Year thought.
Margot.
Zulita.
And Kaya. And Kaya, I was really pleased to see joined up because I sat next to her at a meeting last year at the Assembly of States Parties, and she already knew who I was and she was already listening to the podcast and has taken the plunge to give us some support as well. So I will make sure you get on the podcast sometime during this year, Kaya, as a reward for being so nice as to join up.
Oh, are we now bribing people that,
yes,
that they have to be Patreon supporters to get on the podcast?
Absolutely. If they're really relevant and they're running a really interesting research project that is exactly one of the subjects that we want to cover during the new year.
Okay, so your standards have not slipped.
No, but I'm just saying it to entice people in as well. We also just got a message at the end of last year from somebody who said that they wanted to buy one of our mugs, who hasn't been on the podcast and won't be on the podcast very likely, but would like to buy a mug. So I just throw that out at the end of this episode. If anybody does want to buy a mug from us, then you're very welcome to do so, but you have to cover postage as well. And we'll see whether we can manage that. But generally, the mugs are for the top tier on Patreon and for those who've been on the podcast. And thank you so, so much for supporting us, those people who do.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie Vandenberg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.